What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Simplified Podcast. I am your host, Joe Anklam, and today I'm joined by my guest, Crystal Herrington. Crystal has a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from Marquette University and is a registered nurse. She is also a certified integrative nutrition health coach who specializes in anti-inflammatory diets and longevity. Through her experience as a registered nurse on the Inpatient Spinal Cord Injury and Disorder Center at the Minneapolis VA, she found her passion in preventing disease through diet and lifestyle changes, which further inspired her to launch her own health coaching practice, Savoring Health. She is a healthy recipe developer, food blogger, and teaches healthy classes in the community. In today's conversation, we cover why quality nutrition matters so much, how someone can eat mindfully and intuitively for better health and better results, as well as why the fitness industry just has it so backwards. I really like this conversation, and I think you all will too. Sit back and enjoy. So getting right into things, I want to kind of start out by just giving the people a little bit more info about you. They obviously just heard a little bit about you, Crystal, in the intro, but tell them a little bit more just about what Savoring Health is and really just what your coaching, program looks like and really just what you do professionally, because I know you're nursing as well. So give them a little bit more insight just so they can kind of get a feel for what you're all about.
Yeah, so when I started nursing, I realized that I was kind of catching people at a point, not necessarily where it was quote unquote too late, but I just realized I wanted to start catching people earlier. And so I always give the analogy of the waterfall where there's a river flowing with a waterfall at the end, and you're standing at the edge where the waterfall is, and people are falling off the edge of this waterfall, and you start throwing in lifesavers trying to help these people, but so many are still falling off. And so I decided I want to run up the stream and stop them from getting in the river in the first place. And so essentially what that is prevention. And America does a really, really bad job at preventing disease and preventing chronic disease specifically. And a lot of that has to do with marketing and, large food corporations and the way that farming has gone in America. But it's really easy to manipulate people nowadays to think something's healthy when it really isn't. And so I found that there was a huge deficit in the education of what people knew to be healthy and how to actually prevent the disease versus being in this reactive medicine world that we live in, where somebody has a symptom, we give them a pill to cover up the symptom. And I really just have been feeling like inpatient nursing is awesome, but I wanted something more. So Savoring Health is kind of the birth of all of those concepts floating around in my head. And so I went and got my certificate in integrative nutrition health coaching. And soon I will be board certified in that as a registered nurse as well. But I take clients on the side. We do a 6-month program where I meet with people twice a month. And we go over something called the Circle of Life, which is essentially 12 different aspects of your life. So there are things like joy, home cooking, education, career, emotion, different things like that, spirituality. And so we look at health as more of from a holistic standpoint, and how we can use all of those different tools to essentially make you eat better, but also just to live a better, healthier life.
Yeah, no, I think that was really well summed up. And I think kind of from that, I think it's really good to realize that like what you're saying is the foundation a lot of times is not really what people are focusing on when they are getting help, and reacting when they're going to the doctor to get, a disease treated or, to get a pill to cover up what's ever going on. A lot of times that foundation of what's actually really causing that problem isn't really met. And I think that sounds really cool because it's basically what you're saying with your program, where it is that holistic sort of approach from the ground level, because our stress and our outside life and all those sort of factors, which we might not think right away at first glance, really affect our health.
Absolutely.
And exercise and that sort of thing. But it does. It's really the main factor, I think, why or why not we might be, in a good spot or not in a good spot. But so I think that's really interesting. And so basically, so right now you are an RN. So tell them a little bit more about what you're doing currently, and kind of maybe get into a little bit more about like what made you realize, and I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but like
Mm-hmm.
what was that step where you're like, hey, I need to get a certification. I need to do, kind of expand my.
Yeah. So right now I work on an inpatient unit, which means it's 24/7. So I work day and night shift, but I work on the spinal cord injury and disorder unit at the Minneapolis VA. And so a lot of what I see is either traumatic spinal cord injuries or the disorder aspect, which is anything from Parkinson's and MS, ALS, different arthritis of the spine that ends up, turning into a botched surgery or things like that. And so, day by day, I do a lot of medication passing, and I really started to feel like the neighborhood, like corner store drug dealer, where, I was just running around passing medications, putting in catheters, emptying bags, and, doing a lot of things that are all super important, when someone is experiencing that chronic disease. But it really, and there was no doubt in my mind that I was helping that person. But I want to catch people earlier, like I said before. And so I started realizing, I'm like, I want to make sure that these people never have to be in this position. And we, have had hospice patients on our unit, and, just seeing the aftermath and people die from these chronic diseases that are almost, 100% preventable, like heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, certain cancers, things like that. And a lot of it stems back to like what we talked before, this finding the root, or what we call like functional medicine. It's kind of this new field where they find the root cause and fix that. And that's something that I really want to be a part of, because I really think that that's the future of healthcare. We talk about the healthcare crisis in America and how we spend billions, trillions of dollars on healthcare, and 99% of that is reactive healthcare. And so, this functional medicine approach, or this root cause analysis, is really going to stop disease in its tracks and help to reverse what has already been happening. And so that's kind of why I realized I need to do something else. Like, yes, nursing is amazing, and I can do a lot with a bachelor's in nursing, but how can I do more to reach more people earlier, essentially?
No, totally. I think that's amazing, honestly. And I think really, and that's kind of, it's funny you mentioned that, because I think you coined what I was going to bring up. And that's the fact that, so basically you're in a very, Western medicine sort of, field, really. I mean, like that's your day to day. But I think with what you mentioned, like someone would hear that and think of that as a holistic approach, like you said. So I think that combination is so vital, because for me, I'm always like that, where it's like, why not get the little bit of best of both worlds? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's so, I think, polar in one or the other. When you go to a doctor, your typical doctor in America, and it's like, okay, yep, like you said, you're getting this medicine, or this is what's wrong, or whatever. It's not, and even when you have like a simple, like if you're a kid, right, and you have like strep throat or something,
Mm-hmm.
are they like, oh, what's your diet like? Like, what are you doing, as far as like your daily life, right? And maybe a kid's a little different, because obviously, it's someone who doesn't really
Right.
have like even asking the parent, right? Or like,
Yep.
Someone's a young adult, and they keep having the same thing happen over and over again, like, why not try to figure out, maybe a little bit more of that root cause of, simple change that could be made. But is that what, and I know you mentioned it, so functional medicine, is that what you would call the kind of that bridging of the two, where it's like, yes, of course, like you said, people in the VA, like, you're not saying, you can't have any more of your medicine that you need.
Yeah.
But at the same time, thinking like, hey, like the people who are 10 years from this stage, let's figure out what we can do, day to day to help that. Is that kind of what you would say is kind of the bridging of the gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And so functional medicine is a really new field, and it can be scrutinized, but it's because a lot of it has to do with nutrition and diet. And, if you go to medical school, you maybe have a couple classes on nutrition. It's just not talked about, and it's not focused on. And when we think about, I like to use this analogy with my clients. Your body is like soil, okay? And so you're like a garden, right? So what are you giving your body? Are you feeding your body, your soil? Are you fertilizing it with fertilizer that's going to grow cancer? arthritis, healthy metabolic pathways, detoxification, liver support, different things like that. So it's just it's such an important thing to think about, and we just completely miss it in Western medicine. We really, really miss that. So functional medicine kind of bridges the gap. They are, doctors, they're truly doctors, and they've gone to medical school and they can do lab testing, and they just go deeper. They find the real cause of what's going on, and they still prescribe medications to manage symptoms if necessary. But for the most part, they're encouraging lifestyle changes and true changes, or looking like we talked about this earlier, but different genetic defects or things like that, there are genetic defects that make it hard to detoxify certain things or cause certain cancers, or so they can identify that and help you find the best way to support your health so that you can prevent that from happening in the future or treat something that already is happening.
Totally. And I think that's so interesting. And I know we were talking before we started the podcast about like bridging that gap and like where your sort of coaching plan would come into place. Where do you think we really missed that boat as far as bridging that gap? Because obviously, I know offhand, like doctors have, 2,500 plus patients on a roster, and they see you for 15 minutes and, it's quick and in and out. And it's not like it's even their fault, because they're, too burnt out and really too stuck in the system to be able to do anything about it. Where do you think, and explain to someone, who's maybe listening, who's never experienced, a program like that, or, kind of that happy medium before a problem arises. Why do you think that's could be such a benefit to America right at this stage of kind of, getting ahead of the game with a coach or some sort of like I said, nutritionist, or because what would your title be, by the way, when you do, because you actually
Yes. So I graduated, yes. So I did graduate, but I also want to be board certified. So right now my title is BSN-RN, which is Bachelor of Science in Nursing, registered nurse. And then now I am a certified integrative nutrition health coach. And when I become board certified, I'll be board certified in health and wellness coaching.
Totally. Okay. So kind of, that's perfect. That's exactly kind of what I was looking for. So like basically a health coach, why one would benefit from that at this stage, whether they're, 20 or whether they're, 40 and they might be at a good spot or they might be at a negative spot. Why would someone benefit from that in their life? And obviously this is multifaceted, but where does that begin for someone if, you had to explain that?
Yeah, so health coaching is such a new thing. People are kind of scared of it. They're like, oh, why do I need a coach to, learn what to eat and what's healthy? And I think it's so much more than that. But, and even it's becoming very, very popular, actually. It's like this underground movement that's rising up. I just love it. So like if you have Blue Cross Blue Shield health insurance, super common, large health insurance company, and they actually give you kickbacks if you start talking to a health coach. You can get discounts on your health insurance because they're realizing that the power of behavior change, it's a technique that we call motivational interviewing. So it's asking people pointed questions that they typically wouldn't think about in their regular life. So something that commonly comes up is if I have a client who has a particularly poor eating habit. They come home from work, they're really tired, they open up their cabinet, they're staring at it blankly, they pull out the bag of chips, they start watching TV, and then next thing they know, the entire bag of chips is gone. But when we dig a little bit deeper, we realize that if they had just had a conversation with somebody about how hard their day was, that they probably would not have gone into the cabinet and eaten that entire bag of chips. So it's, once again, even more so than just disease, but eating habits, finding the root cause of our eating habits. Why do you dig into that pint of ice cream? Or why do you, love chips so much after work? Like always have a high calorie snack at that time of the day that's setting you back. And so health coaching can be so powerful because it brings to light a lot of things that we kind of keep hidden because, we consider them dirty or naughty or bad. And we talk about it and talk about healthy ways that we can work through that and find healthier options. And, you can still eat after work, but let's, maybe call a friend, call your parents, call a family member, talk about it if something happened. And then, have a veggie tray or something if that sounds better. But so it goes so much deeper than that. And health coaching is such a simple way to really motivate yourself and find inspiration in your daily life to eat better and to live longer, because longevity is so important.
Yeah, and I think where it's like, of course, day to day, most people can think like, yeah, I probably need to eat healthier, I need to exercise more, but it's like that's so, there's really not much that's like, sand through your fingertips at the end of the day, when you
Yeah.
really break it down, because most people want to do that and they might set that initiative, but really they fall off. Or like you mentioned, with all the marketing and all the different things that are thrown in our face in America, it's like, you never really know, what is right and what's wrong. So I think, of course, making sure you're working with someone that's reputable and that sort of thing, there's good results. You talk with them beforehand about their methods and what you're looking for. I think that's big. But when you're working with someone like that and you can do a lot more executing and really trust the plan, not only it's going to benefit you right now, but also in the long term, I think it gives you a lot more peace of mind and, stresses you less, and you can find that balance and really just live a better life. And I think I always say to my clients, you never really know how much better you can feel until you feel it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's really unbelievable sometimes when you're like, wow, like that's what it feels like, to
Wow, I didn't wake up tired this morning.
exactly, when you just find that balance. And I think that can be so much of it as well, where I'm sure a lot of your clients, they find like the accountability side of it, and like having someone just to bounce ideas off of, your questions, that sort of thing. It can be beneficial in more than one way, because you're not so taking stabs in the dark, such a
Yeah.
like a confused feeling where you might be spinning your wheels, and then eventually it leads to giving up because you're like, I'm just not seeing results, even though I feel like I'm putting so much effort in.
Right. And I think I love that you talked about the whole accountability aspect of it, because that's something that my clients say that is so important to them, is the fact that, they're held accountable, but it's not like, obviously I'm not punishing them or yelling at them, but just showing them that bad things happen in life. You get super stressed, the holidays come around, you have a birthday party, things happen, and it's not about feeling bad about yourself, but it's learning how to move forward through life, making the healthiest choices possible, but still living in balance. And I think I've heard you talk about this quite a bit, is the whole 80-20, or sometimes I say even 90-10 lifestyle, of 80 to 90% of what you eat being healthy food, and the other 10 to 20% being things that, like, straight up you just want, like a panza, or like, ice cream or something like that. Like, people always ask me, they're like, they see me eating a donut at work, they're like, oh, that's bad for you. And I'm like, yeah, it is. But guess what? It's making me really happy right now. And there is no food that's off limits to me. So, and it's just that example of, I still eat everything that people eat. I don't cut anything out of my life, but I do it in moderation. And my dad always used to say, moderation is the hardest word in the English language to learn. And it's totally true.
Yeah, well, because I don't think very many people actually practice true moderation. I think that
No.
they might say it and they might think they are, but it's like, no, when you actually are being moderate, and you're finding a balance, like you're actually okay. Like you can literally eat anything and do, the normal life of a, which should be everyone's normal life of a human, where it's like you can
Yeah.
go out for your birthday, right? Or like enjoy a holiday with your family, right? And like
Yeah,
never think
exactly.
that at work, like you're a robot. And I think that's where it's like, that can be such a important thing when it comes to the mental side of it, where if you do restrict and create that black and white mindset, that's when those negative relationships and really just those nasty sort of side effects of just crash diets, or
Yeah.
views and fad diets, and again, which is usually again correlated to the marketing out there, which is right in our face. So it's crazy. It's like, you can create such a horrible relationship, or a negative relationship, and create like eating disorders even from not enjoying and finding that balance. And I think,
Absolutely.
but it's such a weird concept for people to understand, right? Because especially someone who is maybe already, dealing with a binge eating, or, has something going on that's been a long-term problem where they've yo-yoed back and forth. And then it's like, oh, well, how do you think, like, how am I going to be able to, eat something that may have been a trigger for me, and always have been a problem for me, and you're telling me now I can eat it? Well, it's like, well, obviously there's nuance to it, of course, and the situation is so delicate.
Right.
But you got to be able to realize that, keeping yourself away from it is only going to make that even worse. And it's like, it's going to magnetically pull you to it, And it's like,
Yeah.
It's wild, but
And
it's
it's
about
so
that.
interesting too, because like I said before, I don't necessarily not eat, and there's nothing that I won't eat. But that being said, um, with the whole relationship with food, I think that's such an important thing to talk about too. And what I really like people to focus on is how certain foods make you feel. So I, don't like to eat like Little Debbie snack cakes because I know that's going to make me feel like absolute garbage. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it may taste okay for a second, but like I'm going to feel so terrible later. And, there are probably going to be other things that come up, like maybe a skin breakout or constipation or, something along those lines where it's like, I don't even want, it's not worth it. Like after a while, you just start getting so in tune with your body that you just know what's going to make you feel good. And you're like, even if you do have that opportunity presented to you, you're just like, no, man, like I want to feel good in the morning. Like I don't want to binge drink tonight, or I don't want to have, all these mixed drinks with soda or a cake or anything like that, because I want to feel good. And so when we start thinking about food in the context of feeling and how our body is functioning, I want to be fully functional. And um, that is so helpful in helping people heal their relationship with food too, because it's not just about, oh, that's bad for me. It's not necessarily bad for you. It's just not going to make you feel good. So that's another like concept that I try and teach people.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Actually, the podcast, if anyone to listen to it with my client Mitch, he's killing it right now. He's about 65 pounds down from 310,
Amazing.
325 to just under 260. And he's someone who's literally, like I said, he talks about it, and I encourage everyone to listen to that. But he really mentions exactly what you just said, Crystal, where he's like, now I don't feel like I need to eat, a pizza. He literally says, he's like, I don't have to have Domino's every night. And I
Yeah.
struggle, but he goes, but when I want to go out and enjoy myself and I want to choose to eat something or have fun with my friends, he's like, I feel like I can find that balance. And I finally realized that, it doesn't need to be so black and white with it. And it can't be, it literally can't be, because that's
Yeah.
put me in a tailspin eventually, no
And
matter who you are with willpower.
yeah, absolutely. And that's like the reason why I named my business what it is. It's we savoring health. It's savoring those moments where we feel good in our body. It's savoring those minutes, because all of us, every single person who's either listening to this in America, we all know and love somebody with a chronic debilitating disease, whether that be diabetes, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, MS, ALS, anything. We all know somebody who is affected by that. And you go and ask them, health, and they will tell you that health is truly wealth. And it's such a hard thing to come to terms with, when the food that we are marketed and the food that is provided in stereotypical grocery stores in America is so hyper palatable, that it creates these dopamine responses that makes us want more. And so it's that whole concept of just, savoring the healthy moments and the feelings, rather than, eating that entire Domino's pizza just for the flavor, because that's why a lot of people do it. It tastes so good and it's hyper palatable and salty and fatty. And, sugar is such a huge thing that I talk to my patients about too, that can be as addictive as cocaine. There are studies that are coming out that show that it has such a negative impact on our brains and is so addictive. So just like going back to that original concept that I was talking about, just savoring the healthy moments, understanding how food is making you feel, and tuning into your body and really listening to what it's telling you about what you just ate.
Yeah, and I think kind of what you just mentioned about it being so addictive, I think like about the motivational interviewing, I think that's so important, because that's definitely something I've utilized a lot of times. And before I actually even learned about it, I was like, oh, I actually do that a little bit without even really realizing it.
Right.
The
It's
way
not
that
hard.
yeah, and it allows someone to like really feel, not in a rude way, like you said, because you're not. I always say to my clients, I'm not grading you, right? I'm not here to
Right.
like you're doing all right, great job, like it's like
Right. A plus or
yeah,
B minus.
of course I'm going to celebrate your wins and everything, but I'm going to be realistic in terms of like if we need to change things and things aren't going well, I always say, like, I just want you to be open with me, because that's how we are going to be able to take this on, and flank the problem in the best way. So it's like, what you're mentioning as far as motivational interviewing, I think it's funny because I actually heard that the first time with like psychology in mind, like from like,
Mm-hmm.
either like a, domestic, sort of like relationship, marital problems, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
addiction even too, with actual like substance abuse. And it's so interesting because it's like, it really is, it's obviously not the same. There's a lot of physical dependency that's obviously different, and everyone will make the argument there, but seeing it, and you're the exact perfect person as well, where you see it day to day too, you're like, no, it definitely is very strong. It might not be, have these withdrawal symptoms, but it's so readily available, where,
Right.
you can make the argument, whatever, drugs are highly available as well, but you don't have a 7-Eleven down the street that you could walk to
Right.
in seconds, and again, like you mentioned, releasing dopamine. Like, I literally have had clients, Mitch says it on the podcast, where he's like, I've literally ate where I don't feel good, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
still liking it. So
Yeah.
and I mean, I've done it. We've all done it.
Yeah, it's like the Ponzi scenario. You're like, oh, I want it so bad, and then you eat it, and you're like, damn it, but it was so good.
Yep. But it's again finding that fine line of, like, again, you're in Waukesha once in a while. And for everyone listening who isn't from Waukesha,
Yeah, we should explain that.
What a Ponzi is, basically, imagine just like a pizza, but that's kind of like way more greasy than a normal pizza, and then that's like wrapped in,
Folded in half and deep fried.
in the dough of the pizza, and then deep fried just to top everything off, and then you eat it. And exactly, so there's a perfect example, right? Damn well going into that, everyone listening can imagine how great you're going to feel after that. So it's like,
not at all. You're going to feel terrible.
You're going to feel horrible. But at the end of the day, you find that balance of like, hey, I'm not doing this on a random Tuesday night for fun, because I do it every week or something,
Right.
That example, like, people will be like, oh, I went out for, my husband's birthday. Like, I'm sorry. Like, they'll apologize to me if they're just, and I'm like, no.
Yeah. Don't be sorry.
Yeah, like, you got to enjoy yourself. I'm glad. If you didn't, it's going to be, something's wrong there, because you're going to be living a resentful life, because
Right.
you're not finding that balance. So,
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that brings a good point about and we keep coming back to this topic of you're healing your relationship with food, but when that woman said that to you, that she got stressed about that, right? And so her body started releasing cortisol, which is such a powerful hormone, and it's highly inflammatory, and so Americans kind of live in this constant state of stress, right? All of the blue zones in the world, something that every single one of them, the blue zones are the areas of the world where people live the longest and are healthiest for the longest. But anyway, so all of them have in common where they have some sort of regimen every single day, whether that be 30 minutes to an hour, where they are reducing stress in the middle of the day or in the evening. In America, just we don't have that. We're constantly going. We're constantly on the move. And then when you add on top of that, feeling guilty and having this terrible relationship with what you're eating, your body is in a constant state of fight or flight, and that halts your digestion. It shunts blood away from your vital organs, and it really causes inflammation in the body, and it's just so negative. And so I really focus on that, like I said, healing relationship with food, but it's so much bigger than just feeling okay with what you're eating. It's actually a physiological process in the body that I'm trying to reduce in my clients, because of how detrimental that is on disease risk. And chronic stress is such a risk factor for all chronic diseases, and when combined with eating unhealthy foods, it's just a recipe for disaster.
And exactly, and I think that's the problem, where if you don't have any education on it and you're just putting these foods are put in front of you, and I think our generation's a perfect example of that, where our parents really didn't know any better until I think probably and I think, again, it goes back to, there's probably definitely people who didn't know better, but there was so much thrown at us, where what, in like the 90s, you're talking about, oh, you can't eat any fat,
no fat.
And then you flip it, all right, no carbs, like
no carbs. Yeah.
There's always something, and it's, again, like, I think, like, almost like you could call it capitalism, really, like marketing,
Yeah.
what's going on. And then you have the crazy, big big scale of it where there's like, these things coming out where like the sugar industry and stuff paid off to say that, that fat was the problem. So that carbs,
Right.
it's just like, there's so much.
It's so deep. It's so much deeper than we all think. And it's so silly when, people demonize certain, even especially macronutrients, but certain, micronutrient demonization and just different things like that. I just really am not a fan of that whatsoever. And I mean, there's a reason that they're macronutrients. Like, our body needs all of them to work properly. And, our brain loves carbs. So I don't like when I hear that people are stopping, eating carbs. And unless you're a child with a seizure disorder, I don't recommend going on a keto diet because that's like literally the only thing that has been researched that it shows that it is even slightly effective on that. So, yeah, that goes back to the whole yo-yo dieting and the relationship with food, where we're always finding something that's a problem, or something that's, the villain in the situation, the bad food. And I try to teach that there really are no bad foods. It's connecting back to how we feel after we eat that food, not necessarily the food itself is bad.
Like, what is this going to do for me? You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
Do not only like right now in the immediate, in this next hour after it digests, what is this going to do in like the inner, like the medium, right? Like the middle ground of like, a month from now, like how is this going to impact my, whether it be fat loss goals or muscle building goals or just my overall health goals.
Yeah.
And then what is it going to do for my long term? Like, I always try to say that, where it's like, try to, again, it's that mindful eating tactics where that's really what mindful eating is. Like you said,
Oh yeah.
how you're going to feel after, where did my food come from? Where, like, why, like, I love that, what you said, and I'm totally going to steal that about the fertilizer, like your body, and like your body's soil, like where it's like,
yeah, please do. Yeah.
It's like, and that's so true. Cause you really do. And when you start to realize it and you have like I said earlier, you don't know how much better you can feel after you've eaten, a certain way for a decade. And you're like, you wake up tired every day. Like,
you don't know anything different.
Yeah, exactly. But then maybe you have a week or let's say 2 weeks and you do start to eat better and then you fall off the wagon. You did experience that, like that betterment where you're like, wow, now I feel like crap again. Like,
yeah, you're like, shoot.
and then you become more aware of it. And I think that's the beginning process of that cycle, because, you're going to have those off days, of course, but it stops it from being so yo-yo back and forth of like, a month, of consistency. And then all of a sudden, you're back at square one for 2 years or something.
Right.
Way worse. And that's, I think, what most people have happened. But I think you mentioned to me that you have some experience with like the yo-yo dieting sort of thing, and like even with the negatives of and this is something we can get into about calorie tracking and just viewing that as black and white as well. Talk about that a little bit if you want to, Crystal.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I've had an eating disorder in the past, but I've definitely had a very, very negative viewpoint of my body. And I think that probably 9 out of 10 women in America can, if not 10 out of 10 women in America can say that they have had that, where they've skipped meals because they wanted to look a certain way. And just in, recent studies of mine and as I've grown older, I just have learned how detrimental that is on a woman's body, anybody's body. And so that whole cycle of restricting and restricting and restricting, and then all of a sudden it's 10 p.m. and you find yourself, like spoon deep in a peanut butter jar and you've eaten like half of it. And now you all of a sudden are way over your 1,500 calorie a day limit that you set yourself to. And it's that whole binging and restricting, and it puts your body in this primal state of storing excess fat, because your body is expecting you not to eat now. And it's like, oh my God, you just gave me a crap ton of food. Like, I'm going to store this for later, when you're not going to feed me for 24 hours or, whatever that may be. And it's that whole like famine and feast primal scenario that our body is putting us through. But in terms of what you talked about with counting calories, that can be super helpful for people who want to, lose a lot of weight, and for kind of the whole scenario that you're helping people with, which is really important, but it's not sustainable. And it's also can be very harmful for people who have a history of eating disorders, or women specifically who have this really negative idea of how food and their body interact. And so I've actually never counted calories in my life, because I've I've tried to for like a couple of meals, and I'm just like, oh my God, I hate this. Like it's just this obsessive mindset that starts to kick in for me, and I know that it's bad, and so I just have never done it. And I'm blessed to have what a lot of people are now calling "quote unquote" thin privilege, where I have the privilege. Yeah, like where it's like you have a privilege to like not have to worry about, eating a certain way or eating something because you're thin. And, people look at overweight people a certain way. And there's obviously people have a very negative outlook on quote unquote fat people, this whole fat shaming thing that it, we talk about. And I obviously, there's good and bad to that whole idea of the quote unquote thin privilege. I'm not going to say that I'm like a complete backer of that, but it's just an interesting concept to think about. To think that, I have never had to count my calories because I'm not, 150 pounds overweight, but someone who is, that could be beneficial for them. So it's a very intricate situation, and I think it all depends on the person and what they have been through and what healthy habits, or unhealthy habits, I should say, that they have.
Totally. Well, and I think your main point is just that there's not one way to go about it, and that for everyone. And I think this is something that I've really, started to realize as I get more and more into my coaching, where, it just doesn't work for some people, and some people don't need to do that. Like you said,
right.
Or if we were working together and I was just like, I'd be a horrible coach if I just was like, oh, that's not working, Crystal, we'll keep going. Like, it's too bad, like that's
yeah.
not a way of planning things. And that's
right.
what I think you're bringing up, the point of, and I have a little sort of way I would go about it, and sort of try to implement more of what you were mentioning. And I want you to talk more about it, but portion control, essentially, where you're like, I have a thing I call it's like the 3 meal and 2 snack rule. And it's something I coined from Jordan Syat. And he's, I don't know if you know him at all, but he's pretty well known. But
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's just like, not everyone needs to track calories, but the analogy I always use is like, when you're driving in your car, right, it's like you don't have to look down at your speedometer, but like sometimes if you're getting ticket after ticket speeding wise, you should probably look down, right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah, I love that.
But there's more than one way of going about it. And that's where I think a lot of times people do think of it as, which can be very negative, it's like, oh, calories, 1,200 calorie diet, that's the only way to do it. That's what I'm doing, and
right.
It's like so drastic with it. But when you look at it, or they think of weighing every single thing out that they ever eat for the rest of their life, and it's like that's not it, like, at all. Because I myself, I'm the same way. I do not track my macros every single day. I don't track my calories every single day. But what I do is I'll tell you, just like the next person, I hate tracking. Like, it's not fun. The act
no one likes it.
Yeah, exactly. But I just know, actually, Crystal, I do think there's some people out there who are OCD who love
That's true. I shouldn't say nobody. There's always going to be someone that likes it.
Because I was gonna say, I agree with you that the majority, like 9.5 out of 10 people, I would
right.
say. But like I've met people who are like, no, I love it. Like, 'cause they're like, I think they like that order, type A.
Yeah, the list oriented people.
But and they also probably eat like the same thing every day, which,
right.
back to the point, it's really, I think it's eye opening to see, like I was mentioning, if you eat 3 meals in the day, and that's kind of what I'll do it, where it's like, you break it down into, I'll say, 1 plate for those meals. You have to eat breakfast, you have to eat lunch, you have to eat dinner, just to kind of break the monotony up of, okay, like again, a downfall of tracking. You're like, I'm just going to save all my calories for the end of the night, and then it becomes like,
yep.
like, for real. Because at the end of the day, if I said to them, which I do say, and this is like, again, where so much nuance goes into it, people are like, how many meals should I eat in the day, Joe? And I'm like, oftentimes I'll literally say, whatever number of meals, works best for you in terms of what's going to keep you on track, in terms of feeling good, right? But based on your schedule, how you like to eat. And obviously, again, there's nuance to it, but I'm basically making the point that if you eat carbs after 6, or you have a meal, an hour before dinner, it's not going to totally throw off the spectrum. Or, eating small meals metabolism wise isn't going to have some dramatic effect. But again, looking at it just from right now in our conversation, which is why I love doing these conversations, I'm like, someone who has a problem with binging, they might look at that like, oh, well, Joe said I can eat however many meals I want. All right, I'm going to have one meal to start the day, and then I'm not going to eat until after dinner or whatever, I get home from work.
Right.
It's going to be game on, and it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
it's so that's why it's just like, wow, like even now, like you have to look at so much of the context, and it's like, you often say, and I'm like, my answer is like on auto record where somebody asks me something, I'm like, well, it depends.
Yeah, it's all individual.
Totally does. So I think that's important. And so I guess tell me a little bit more, like I kind of mentioned, so like for my like 3-meal 2-snack rule, like I said, I try to split it up where you're always eating on a plate. You try to keep it to one plate where you're not going overboard there. Try to make them all meals that you're making at home. That's another requirement I have. And then for the snacks, it's just like something that can fit in your palm, right? So like, an apple or
Right.
like some nuts or like something like that. Like, so tell me like how you kind of would go about it if somebody was maybe struggling with tracking or maybe had just a experience with it. How would you go about it in terms of your method of portion control? Because I think we both agree where it's like you need to control your calorie intake in some fashion, but you also need to be worrying about other things as well. So fill them in.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting topic. And yeah, we talked about before how, the term calorie deficit. And I think I come from the point of view of someone, or more so women too, who have struggled with their relationship with food and their body and everything like that. And so I found that a softer way of saying it is, portion control. And so typically, something that I've found that really, really helps with that is studying and learning the concept of mindful eating and all of the different steps that go into becoming a mindful eater, and like, what does that even mean? And so the first step of that would be understanding the ingredients of the food that you're eating. So I'm actually starting something on my Instagram soon, and it's going to be called Guess the Food Like Substance. And so I'm going to put ingredients of a food and have people guess what the food is. But that's just so common in the standard American diet nowadays, where we have no idea what's in the food we're eating. And so that's kind of step one for me with people in terms of portion control and mindful eating is, what is in your food? Where did it come from? Was it treated well? Was it factory farmed? All these different things. Just thinking about that whole soil concept again. Did it come from healthy soil? Was it, there are tons of different pesticides that are used in different things, but just understanding, and I really want people to think about what they're eating and the quality of the ingredients. And then, so that's number one. And then number two is preparing it. So I'm a huge believer in home cooking and preparing food for yourself. And A, it's cheaper, B, it's healthier, and C, it gives you an opportunity to make everything yourself. And actually I can't remember the name of the doctor right now, but it stuck with me when I was in school. But he said, he tells his patients that they can eat whatever they want as long as they made it themselves. He doesn't care what it is that they've eaten, as long as it's from a whole foods ingredient. He says, eat as much ice cream as you want, as long as you made the ice cream yourself, So, and I really love that, because it makes you think about what you're eating, right? You're not going to eat as much of it because you know what went in it.
Yeah, totally.
So,
well, you're not gonna like just be able to just keep gorging on it, because you're also preparing it, which I think that effort is half the battle for people, where they're like, oh, if I can just keep eating this and I don't even have to make it, it's just coming out of a bag or something.
Right.
Of course I can just eat tons of it, right?
Yeah, it's just available for me, so I'm gonna do it because it tastes good and I want it. Yeah, so those are the first two like preliminary steps like of mindful eating before you even start eating. And the second one, so those are the first two. The third one, which is increasingly important in terms of evidence that's coming out to show the importance of this, is chewing your food properly. We as Americans have such a poor habit of just dogging down our food in front of the TV without having a second thought about what we're eating or how it tastes or anything. 3 bites and we swallow. And that is digestion starts in your mouth. Your saliva is filled with beautiful digestive enzymes that start to break down the walls of the cells of the food that you're eating, and breaking those molecules apart so that it's easier to absorb and digest once it reaches your small intestines. And so when you're skipping that part, it's really hard. And if you think about it, after your teeth, you don't really have any sort of mechanical way to break down the food that you're eating. And so I really encourage people, like, common ways that I encourage people to do is set down your fork in between bites, or count how many times you chew, or slow down how fast you're chewing. Think about it. Like, don't let it be this mindless practice that you're just, it's okay to still watch TV while you eat. That's fine. But just that slowing down, allowing your body, it takes 20 minutes for your body to, once you are full, to send the hormones that your brain understands that you're full. So there's 20 minutes in between the time that you're full, to the time that you feel like you're full. And so that mindful eating, or that slowing down, actually allows you to, like, going back to this concept of listening to your body and being like, oh damn, like, I actually am full. I wanted a second plate of those enchiladas, but because I slowed down, I actually don't want it because I'm full now. Your stomach is really only about as big as your fist when it's empty, and it can expand a lot. But after a certain point, these ghrelin and leptin and these hunger hormones are sent to our brain. And so we just need time to allow our bodies to listen to that.
Totally. And I think the big thing that really I want to kind of bring up, and I know we were talking about this before the podcast starts, that someone listening to this, like, let's say they literally eat out every single meal, right? And they literally do every single thing that you're saying.
Yeah.
They're like, I gorge down everything in my car while I'm driving, right? And they're like, I never eat at home, and like,
right.
feeling overwhelmed listening to this. Like, Crystal is definitely not by any means, and I know she would totally agree. Like, she's not trying to say that you need to do it all in one swing.
No, absolutely not. It's a process, people.
we were kind of joking where, like, like, people who have kind of built that foundation, that's when you can start really incorporating more of this, because it's a progression. And that's, I think, where, correct me if I'm wrong, you said your program is 6 months, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and that's exactly, it's funny because mine is 6 months as well, and I used to do 12-week plans, and I would do all these different things, and now people ask me, they're like, do you have a month long? Do you have and I'm like, no, we need time, like, we need like, it takes
behavior change takes time.
100%. And that's the thing, like, most people know, even when I give them the plan, like, that's the other thing, like, you can have the plan smack dab right in your face, even something that's like perfect to your life, and it takes the effort and it takes that initiative to be able to actually learn those new different sort of patterns and habits daily, as far as what's going to be, better and what's going to really help you move in the direction that you want to go. But I think that's so key, because it's like, some people can just feel overwhelmed, but those small wins are really what's going to lead you that path of being able to eat mindfully during every meal, and not have it feel like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming.
And like, I don't want people to picture me like sitting in like a yoga pose, like eating like a salad, like with my eyes closed and like praying while I'm eating. Like, that's like not what it is. But I still obviously like watch TV while I eat, and I go out to eat, and I eat fast food, and I eat in the car and whatever. But it's a learned behavior, and over time, I've slowed myself down, and part of that too is something that I wanted to touch on too, is like this micronutrient focus. And so it's me saying in my head, like, oh, damn, did I get enough magnesium in my diet today? What can I eat that has magnesium in it? I know I got to relax, and magnesium is super important for digestion. And how can I get more of that in my life? And so once you start going, it's that deep dive that we talked about. And that's just, it's a never ending learning process. I'm always going to be learning. There's always new studies coming out. And like we said, it's that continuum, and it's just starting where you're at. There's no winning. There's no losing. Nobody's better than anybody else, because society has trained us all to, eat a certain way and think a certain way. And it's a lot more unlearning than it is learning, if anything. So that's just kind of my opinion about the whole societal construct of eating and dieting and relationships with food.
Yeah, I think that's really big, and kind of what you said there, where it's like a lot of times it is the common sense thing that, really is what you need to be doing. And a lot of times, it's not some big, weird new crazy diet that's out there. A lot of times even the research that is coming out will confirm some of the things that, people have been doing for a long time. And it's like, oh, it's not just so, oh, the keto diet ends up coming out as being just a breakthrough, right? Because like that's a perfect like analogy where it's like, well, okay, then if it is such a breakthrough, or any of these fad diets were, then why is the obesity problem still on the rise and going to be higher than ever in a decade?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It would, it'd be solving it. So it's like, and everyone would be doing it. And it's just so interesting, because that's where, there's obviously needs to be some sort of a middle ground there. And I think that's exactly where, where we're coming from with things, where it's like, all right, slow and sustainable. We need to be able to make those behavior changes somehow, educate and really be able to do that for people and for the masses, really. So I think that's important. And I want you to talk about a little bit more, because I don't think we really touched on it too much, but the inflammation side of things. So for
Yeah.
someone who's trying to lose weight, or someone who's trying to remain free of chronic disease, or just wants to feel better, why would they benefit from having an anti-inflammatory style of diet, and what can that even look like, and really what does that entail, if you were to explain that to someone in general, Crystal?
Yeah, I love talking about this. This is my favorite topic. I'm actually writing an ebook on that right now, and it's going to be really great. So I think inflammation is kind of a buzzword right now, and people, when you think of inflammation, I just want you to think of like, oh man, you just sprained your ankle. Okay, what happens after that? It starts to swell, it gets really red and warm, there's pain there, maybe some bruising, and things like that. And that's acute inflammation. And that's the inflammation that we love. And that's the inflammation that helps us survive. That's what our body is made to do, to keep us safe, and heal things that have been broken. But when we're constantly breaking and hurting things in our body, like we're constantly scraping or damaging the walls of our arteries, that's when plaque starts to build up. And that's when our veins and arteries start to become inflamed. And that's when you see heart disease. Or the same thing happens in the micro vessels of the brain. And that's how you see Alzheimer's and dementia. Or, the pancreas becomes inflamed and we become insulin resistant. That's how we get diabetes. And so all of these huge chronic diseases in America are, the stepping stone is inflammation. And new studies are coming out about that every single day. And when there's just too much of it in our body, from either chronic stress, increased cortisol release happening all the time, we're always in that state of fight or flight. That's that low grade, they call it low grade inflammation, chronic inflammation, sore and swelling joints, bloating in the gut, different things like that, feeling fatigue or brain fog in the mornings, hard to really get your thoughts together. All of that are early symptoms of chronic inflammation. And in terms of weight loss, it's really important to talk about too, because fat cells, we're learning, actually secrete hormones themselves, and they're very inflammatory to the body. And that's why that truncal or that stomach obesity is so negatively impacting your disease risk, because all your vital organs are in that area. And so when they're covered with a layer of inflammatory fat, that's very taxing on those organs and puts a damper on those processes. And so I think that inflammation is something that we can learn about every single day. And there's a lot of little habits that goes back to what we continue talking about, the behavior change, but a lot of the little habits that we do on a day-to-day basis that are causing that chronic low-grade inflammation in our body, and how connected it is to disease and weight loss and everything. And so I think for you, like, you focus on, weight loss and everything, and that's amazing. And so I think we're doing the same thing, but we're going at it from different ways, because I'm coming at people and saying, let's reduce the inflammation in your body. And people understand that a side effect of that is losing fat, which is really exciting because most of the time, like we talked about earlier before we started the podcast, was when people start eating more fruits and vegetables and beans and nuts and seeds and healthy fats and things like that, they realize that they don't eat as many calories because there's more fiber. It's more filling than eating something that's extremely high calorie, but not filling at all. So they naturally end up seeing the weight loss as a side effect of taking on an anti-inflammatory diet.
Totally. And they also feel much better too. That's the other thing I think is
Right.
big too. Like, cause inflammation can be like, cause I want to mention that. Cause like, let's say someone who's like perfectly healthy, right? A young adult, and they're like, well, I don't like you. Why would I care? I don't feel any inflammation, right? I don't have any problems, Crystal. Like, why would someone benefit from that who's like young, who doesn't have, any sort of, right? They don't have arthritis. They don't have any chronic disease
Yeah.
going on.
Well, and it's good that you say that. So yeah, like why do I care about that? It's because you're gonna have to care about it someday. We all know somebody. Like I said, we all know a loved one, if not a direct parent, with a chronic disease or a precursor to a chronic disease. And think about how young they are, and think about how old we are now. We're in our 20s, and being in your 40s and 50s really isn't that far off. And I always like to tell people the choices that you make today decide how you feel 20 years from now. The what you eat for dinner tonight is not only going to affect how you feel today, but it's going to affect your immunity and your fertility and your metabolism and your detoxification processes and your brain function and your gut health, and the list goes on. And so it's getting to that point where the person has to be wise enough themselves to understand that this is the ultimate form of investing. I love talking about finances. I think it's so exciting. I think retirement is so cool. But a lot of people don't. They think it's boring and they want that instant gratification. But when you start investing now, the dividends that you see when you are older are going to be tenfold if you start to care now. And so I cannot stress to people enough. I always put in my Instagram stories, make one healthy choice today. Make one intentionally healthy choice today for yourself, for your children, for your future, so that you can spend your life. The word is morbidity. So morbidity is the number of years before you die, or mortality is the year that you die. The morbidity is the number of years before you die that you spend sick or in a hospital.
Okay.
And so my goal is to reduce morbidity. I want people to live as healthy and be walking as long as they can before they die. Because who wants to be sick for 10 years before they die? Those years aren't spent happy. There's no joy in being in a hospital and not being able to see your family. And I mean, I see that on a daily basis, and that's what fuels my desire. So that's my little rant about that.
No, I think that's super important, because basically, you just want to have quality, over quantity, where you're just like having a miserable existence. It's like, even now that totally can be related, where you're just going to feel better.
Absolutely.
And like you said, you're going to have to care about it. And, it's definitely one of those things that really makes, you realize very quickly that, even like we all know people, even young people, who have that sort of problem, and, it can be even just chance. So it's like, why not take everything that you can on your side to be able to kind of help your cause, and kind of fight that battle for yourself before you really have to fight an extreme battle.
Right. And we live in a society where we're constantly bombarded with, different toxins, or, bad air, or, as we know, like what happened in Flint, Michigan, like, different things in the water, or just there's always something in our society that is harming us. So everything that you can take into your own hands, I just want people to feel like they have control, and to be super intentional about going back to that soil analogy. What are you breeding in your garden? What is your garden growing? and just to think about that, and for the rest of your life, what are you growing, and what do you want to grow in the future? Because growing is an investment. You don't see necessarily the good results immediately. It takes time. And that's part of that whole that's why we do the 6-month program, right? We don't believe in that instant gratification, because it really just doesn't exist. That's why those body wraps and detox teas and DNA tests or whatever it may be, just that doesn't work. And it may work for a very short period of time, but it's not sustainable, and it's not something that's gonna be beneficial for us in the long run, because that just feeds into that negative relationship with our body and the negative relationship with food.
Totally. I think that was really well said. And I think that I loved what you mentioned before about, and this is, I think, something really everyone can take away from this, especially if you feel like you might be like ground zero with things and you're like, oh, I really need to make some changes. I think, like you said, start with one thing a day, one healthy thing, one thing that's going to benefit you, immediately, in the intermediate and in the long term, because that's going to compound. And I think that goes back to a lot of my coaching techniques of, like, being really mindful about those small daily habits, really compounding into big long-term results, because it can feel overwhelming.
Absolutely.
I have my weeks and months where I'm like, oh crap, this month wasn't very good in terms of eating.
Yeah, seriously. December, I don't even want to talk about December.
Exactly. This life. But I think I always mention, one of the biggest forms of progression that my clients, see, and most people don't see it unless you're really brought it up and it's like made aware to you, where I'm like, hey, you bouncing back, from a bad week or a bad day or a bad month or whatever, is so huge as far as progression, because that's building, upon the ability to just get right back on track and not dwell on it. Learn from it, of course, but don't dwell and beat yourself up.
Right.
Eventually tailspin even more, because you're just like, screw it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we are so hard on ourselves. But
And like, I loved that you talked about, like the little changes. And in this ebook that I'm writing, there are areas for reflection, and I go over daily steps, that building and building and building and building to build the foundation, and then you can start building the house. You need a strong foundation before you can start really building anything. So I hope that I can reach people with this document. And so if anyone has questions, like, please feel free to reach out to me. Like, I love DMing people and talking to people about their problems. Like, this is what I'm nerdy and passionate about. So if anyone is hearing this, has questions about anything I'm talking about, or is going through a chronic disease, or has a loved one, I would love to talk to you about it. And I think this was such a beneficial conversation. For the the average layperson who may not be a medical professional, to kind of get a little bit more of an understanding into where I hope medicine is going. So
for sure. And really, and in between medicine and really, the just the average person, right? The general population,
right.
kind of that middle ground, meeting halfway kind of thing. But no, I think I would agree. I think this is very, very insightful, and I would love to have you back on. And if anyone wants us to get into anything more specific, definitely let us know. But I will leave all of Crystal's information. If you have any questions for her, I will leave all that below, as far as how you can contact her, and just so you can get in touch if you have any questions, or you're interested in coaching and you want to learn a little bit more. So again, thank you so much, Crystal. I think this is awesome, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to next time.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And if you guys are listening on YouTube, make sure you just drop a like, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos or podcasts. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you're still watching. And if you would like to get in contact with either of us, if the YouTube comments are still turned off, they've been doing me dirty over at YouTube. So shoot us a message on Facebook or on Instagram if you'd like to get a hold of either of us. All info down below. So thank you again, Crystal, and thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a good one.
Absolutely. Bye, guys.